Greetings. This is Content Evolution, New World. Delighted to have you with us. I'm glad that we could spend a moment talking about this continuum between what we experience every day as weather and the longer uh, landscape of what we refer to as climate, and how the narrative and the technology, right, are evolving. Uh, Clearly it's a landscape that's been very interesting in how people perceive what's going on. But there are some observable changes that we see in weather. I remember when I was growing up, Tornado Alley was where my family grew up, which was north central, Oklahoma. It probably was, central all the way up through Kansas and, parts of Missouri, right? I'm betraying that, I was born in Kansas City, Missouri, okay, because the pronunciation. In any event, what I will tell you is, if you look now, it's kind of migrated, south and east, and a lot of the, destruction that you see now with those kinds of, colloquial twisters, are more in Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee, and it's kind of, I'm sure that per capita, you know, Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas, still get, plenty of destruction, because of this phenomenon. But it's also observable that there's more, and that you're beginning to, instead of just see one, that there are clusters of tornadoes, right, that appear in the interior of the United States. So anyway, it's interesting, and we want to talk about it. The computing power that has become available. I don't know if most of you have, can remember when the furthest that you could probably look out was 3 or 4 days, right? With any confidence. And now you can, right, pick up my phone and, Weather Channel gives me something that, goes out 10 days or further, right? Telling me, what's likely to happen. The chances are that it's accurate, deteriorate, over time, but, that they have enough confidence to supply it to me. So there's more computational power and more sensors, more information and data to crunch, to do that work. Mike, glad to have you, co-hosting with me today. I want to get into the narrative between weather and climate narrative and the continuum in between. But I'm also going to just point out one last fact, which is the television weather channel, if you look at the statistics, is the most trusted television program, that you can get, that's on cable, right? Very high. It's kind of like, oh, these guys know what they're talking about, right? So you're right. It's a really interesting franchise, that started in Atlanta, been in your backyard, that has, durably, provided people, people periodically tune into it, all day to see stuff.
Yeah.
Mike,
I don't
Go ahead,
know
Ben.
if it's still true, but the Weather Channel was almost, in the early days of cable, it was the ambient channel. And as you say, people visit, but I still expect that there are a good percentage that keep it as the ambient channel.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Mike, okay, so that was my setup thesis. How about you?
Which I just missed. Can you give it in 2 sentences?
Well, Mike, you recap what I said, right? In your
Well, we're talking about the excuse me, Mark. We're talking about the extremes in weather that are now not isolated events every couple of years. They are consistent parts of our lives now, as opposed to, California, what the Pacific Northwest would always have forest fires that
But we are talking about the weather. Good. Okay, good.
weather elements, and we were pointing out how, after all these decades, the Weather Channel is still one of the most trusted and watched cable franchises around. And I think, we've seen it out here already. The acreage burned the last couple of years in California. We didn't have too many big wildfires. Northern California, Southern California's had a fairly consistent rash, but already in July, which is usually kind of the beginning of fire season out here, we've already burned, as many acres as we have, in the last 2 years combined. So we're dealing with some fairly extreme things, and this is, I think Kevin and I have talked about this. I'm sure we've all had various flavors of this discussion, right? Or, A, it's scary. B, insurance companies are rethinking a lot of things, and how do we bounce back? How do we kind of incorporate more resilience into this, as opposed to, to just simply, throwing more firefighters at it and using the same old strategies that we've had for the last 50 years. I think one of the more important ones, besides, can we use software and modeling to do, be more accurate in terms of prediction? Well, we get those accurate predictions. What do we do? Right? Do we temporarily move people out? Do we shut down, all sorts of types of work that may generate sparks? I don't know. But I think, we're at a moment where, now I would hope, when we talk about, things like corporate social responsibility, et cetera, there are a lot of important cultural elements to that, but also a big focus of that is the environment. What am I doing as a company, as an employer, to minimize my carbon footprint, knowing that my business can't solve all the problems. And I think, there are a number of kind of growing software companies. My niece works at one, that are providing tools, measurement metrics, and platforms to, help you measure and document what a company is doing. And I think we're going to need to see more of that, as opposed to, let's just hire more firefighters, at least out here on the West Coast.
I
Other
don't have the
places,
statistic, Mike, but I think that one of the fastest growing boutique consultancies, right, at least in the United States, I don't know about elsewhere, are these climate consulting, right, organizations that are, giving you information, and, I guess a lot of it's risk management, right, in nature, right. So if you're building, infrastructure, if you're doing manufacturing or whatever, so where should you put a plant?
Right.
Where can you, have less liability in terms of, the roof is going to get, ripped off or whatever. So those are interesting, new, it's a new source of revenue for people in terms of information economy. And as we've talked about when we were talking about smart environments, when we kicked off that conversation, which, by the way, will continue, we're going to have more episodes on that. When our homes, think about, if every home, in being able to manage its heating and cooling, also had some ambient sensory, information about, well, how hot or cold, or, what's the wind or whatever outside. All right. That became one of the sensory arrays, right, that you would use. You wouldn't be just doing this, the smart thermometer inside, but that it was an inside outside, tennis game of information. If you opted in, this thing is connected to a network, right? So it's, Google, right, Nest knows, what that is, from an opt-in point of view. Well, the National Weather Service would have a really interesting sensory network, right? If all of our homes were and all of our buildings were, feeding into a footprint, right? Which, we don't have that now, but I could imagine that could happen. So let's open it up. That's the
Ways for weather.
What, Kyle?
Ways for weather.
Why not?
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to say, last month, Microsoft announced Aurora, which is a new foundational model for weather prediction that's 5,000 times faster than the current, computational model. And the implications of it, what I read in a couple of articles about this is that most weather predictions that we get these days come from the same computer, NOAA's, computer, supercluster that does all the crunching. This model at this sort of efficiencies potentially democratizes this. So I think an implication of this could be that you're getting, lots of different people, democratizing actual forecasting, and they'll use this model in ways that NOAA won't do it, right? So we might end up getting more accurate local forecasting and things like that. Doesn't help the core issue of things being a train wreck climate-wise, but I think it might help with, prediction and things like that. It's fascinating.
Has anybody read anything about quantum computing making that faster?
Well, the math of quantum computing, as far as I understand it, is not the same kind of math that transformers use. So this is transformer based. So
right, but it's another way, and in some cases much faster. And we'll see. I don't know if this applies.
I don't have any visibility to that, Mark, but it's an interesting conjecture. There are conversations, Kyle, that there's that talk about, the intersection of quantum and AI. I just don't know whether it's in the training side or whether it's after you've trained, whether it's using quantum to use the trained model to work faster. I don't know.
To do faster inference. I don't know. I think I saw an announcement about 2 months ago that someone made a breakthrough in bridging those two, but everyone that I've talked to said there's such different kinds of math that they're not really related right now, but they will be at some point, but who knows when.
Right. No, I mean, Kyle, what you were saying too is that, that democratization, right, eliminates a thing that, that there have been a number of concerns from NOAA and other scientists, right, about the ownership of, it's not weather.com. I can't remember which one it is, right? And the guy was selling advanced warning to businesses,
right,
but not letting the rest of the cities around the businesses know about the
that's
tornado.
That's special. Yeah, exactly.
You see those hurricane models, where there are, 8 or 12, all, they say, well, this is the, they have different names, this is the European, whatever model. This is the, those are all, taking inputs and, calculating them differently to give you trajectory paths, right? And I saw that there was one that was more AI inference based that was taking kind of like all of them, and it looked more accurate. It looked like it was tracking, the way that the storms actually behaved, right? Because it was just looking at it, differently, and it wasn't averaging, it was doing something else, right? So I don't know. I don't remember that there was a name, but I seem to think that was adding some benefit to, so where's it going to go, right? Ben, you're putting comments into chat. Go ahead and, use your voice.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what kind of an architecture and how you establish some trusted identities so that you can rapidly roll up and rapidly assess clusters and regional indicators, so that you're not just going moment by moment, because ultimately what we're after is the acceleration, not the velocity, not what you've got happening and what the change is happening, but how the change is changing. And for most of the weather, you're really after that acceleration metrics and analysis rather than just the endpoint velocity. What do we have, and what is it in the next moment? Mm-hmm. And so it would involve a systemic waves-like structure that would that would credential different readers and reporters, because some are going to be honest, some are not, some are calibrated, some are not. So by registering, quote, registry, I shouldn't say that as an official thing, but identifying your devices, that you'll have a better means of not trying to analyze the ocean, but to look at collectors and groups that will assess the veracity of any region or regional assessment.
Right, and over time, you're just looking at the deltas between each one, depending on how you set the grid up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been wondering as we were speaking, it's like, I don't know if they had it, everybody experienced the same thing, but out in the Bay Area in California, a lot of people went crazy when PG&E wanted to put in the so-called smart readers, right? That would allow the reading of them by guys just simply driving by, or even, just reporting straight into the grid. It would make a lot of sense. Why wouldn't you just have a couple of extra sensors on that would, provide that kind of ongoing, whether it's barometric pressure or temperature, whatever. Now that I think about it, maybe we should all band together and make PG&E do that. As part of their ongoing rate hikes, they should at least be doing something like that.
Understood.
I'm going to suggest that sort of a more left field thing, but that occurred to me. And this is connecting weather sensing with what I've been reading more about, the epidemic of loneliness, quote, the lack of connection of humans. And the Gilbert and Sullivan in Pirates and Penzance says, let's talk about the weather, because that's what people talk about. That's the main connecting conversation that humans have, is the weather, because it's all around them. And so is there a way that we can connect eventually the idea of what we're learning to know more about the weather, of who's experiencing it, of how this, in a way that connects people and brings them more together?
I think that's well possible. All right. To the degree that you're a contributor or feel like, you're contributing to the grid of information, actively, that's
That's part of it.
right?
Yes.
I can tell you, I'm going to circle back to the beginning of the call. When I visited family, and then again went to college in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the interesting thing about living in a plain state versus where I live now, because my line of sight to the sky is very limited because I'm surrounded by woods, right? So I have kind of this very narrow vector, looking up. When you are in these really flat, right, places, you can see a storm coming in hour and 15 minutes before it arrives, because it's off on the horizon. You can see it coming, right? I mean, there are all kinds of your situational awareness is different, okay, when you live there. And it's just interesting, that I think that the perspective that people have about weather is, when I'm in the mountain, right, I don't normally trust the forecast very much because it's so variable, right? I mean, it can, whatever they said at the beginning of the day can change by the middle of the day. Oh, well, it something else started to happen, right? Mike, is that your experience with, skiing, or am I just off?
Well, I would say it's gotten a lot better. It's still, very changeable just because of the environment. It's changed more in the not immediate sensing, right? Or as you say, if you live by the ocean, you can see the storm on the horizon. In the mountains, you could have the feel, you could see feeler clouds. Oh, looks like it could rain tomorrow, or the infamous rain dog around thing. But I would say that the technology has gotten, I would say the last couple of years I've been back skiing, is been pretty interesting, because they say road's very likely to be closed, or expect that, or they pre-announced the closure, which they didn't really used to do for the major highways. They would just say, snow chains, bring your chains or snow tires. Now they're basically saying we're closing the road at noon, not in advance, as opposed to waiting for it to build up.
Yeah.
So I think that could be just, also being more cautious about stuff. But the variability, particularly around the mountains and the ocean, Hawaii and the Pacific, still like that. It can look beautiful and clear at 8 a.m, and by 11 o'clock, it's hammering rain.
Tim, you've got a place in Hawaii, right? What's your, that's got to be different than anything we experience in the mainland, right?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, it's hold on a second. It's a very different area. To be fair, the bigger problems of any of the real hurricanes that impact them doesn't come from the east.
Right.
They come actually from the Gulf that starts down by Mexico and then trails up. And we've been pretty lucky, at least in the last few years. We've had the Iniki was incredibly disastrous. We for many
What is
years
that?
rented
What's a Niki?
Iniki was
it was Hurricane Iniki.
Oh,
It
I'm sorry.
was
That's the name
in
of a hurricane. I'm sorry. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry. It was, I believe, in
90,
the
80.
mid 90s or so.
Mm-hmm.
But and we had and rented a beautiful home in Kauai during that period, and it devastated that house. I mean, it just nearly tore it apart because they were really on the coast, and Oahu got hit. On the other hand, it was weird because Maui and Kona, or the Big Island, was basically spared. And since then, they've only had one really major tornado or hurricane. But in their particular case, they have had fairly good forecasts on that and prepared pretty well. On a separate note, one of my good friends is actually a climatologist out of Oahu. And it's very interesting because his models are quite different, and he consults with a lot of the big players in this as well. But if I actually want, it's funny, if I really want an accurate forecast, I just call him. I don't go to NOAA or somebody else. So I cheat. And his accuracy rate is phenomenal based on his models. But he's got a different approach, and it's one that he's doing it as a consultancy, and he's promoting it more and more to these key players. But anyway, back to the Hawaii one. The bigger issue there is what's called the trade winds. The trade winds really drive whatever happens as far as rain and climate, because if the winds are going in any particular direction, and I will point this out, this is that Lahaina fire that happened a year ago, almost a year ago in August, that was fully driven by the winds swept over the mountains in West Maui. And it just, I mean, Lahaina is one of the favorite places that we've been to many times. Our place is in Kihei in South Maui, so we weren't affected. But we have a lot of friends that were up in Lahaina, and I've driven through part of that Lahaina damage. Just can't imagine what happened, but it was all driven because of the winds. Had there been no winds at all, we wouldn't have had that same type of damage. But it swept, and I don't know if you've ever been in West Maui, but you know how those big hills just come down on the backside, and it just was a very distinct area, and it just swept, and it was all driven by climate.
Yeah. Tim, I recall that in Iwa, in on the Poipu beach area and Brenneke
Yeah.
beach area. That so it's sort of like there are different threats on different islands. As you say, when you look at tsunamis, probably are more concerned in say on the Big Island. Uh, when you look at that, regional threats are going to be different, and it's an interesting analog. Hawaii.
100%.
Well, the other thing is that so much of this is truly localized. We have a situation that hit really home to me here in San Jose just recently. But my home sits at the foot of it's not a very big mountain. It's called Miracle Mountain.
Right.
But on July 4th, a series of events took place, started by fireworks, that started that entire range on fire.
Yep.
And I walked out. This was literally around 10 o'clock. I walked out because I was hearing sirens, and I looked up at my mountain, and the entire stupid mountain, 200 yards from my house, was on fire in flames. And it's funny because the San Jose Fire Department called it a vegetation fire. The whole mountain's on fire, but they call it a vegetation fire. And since then, they have replied to, I don't know, 20 quote unquote vegetation fires. And there was one in East San Jose the other day that was over 40 acres.
Yep.
So you're getting these little micro fires because, we all know about the Napa fires and the big fires in the north, but because of the heats, especially, and Bruce, I don't know if that's the case in Sacramento where there was 114, but we were in the 90s during that period. Our mountain was totally dry, and so this thing just lit up like a fireworks, right? And now we're dealing with micro fires as opposed to even the big fires.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of our, Ben and I, we work with people-centered internet, or we run, different program that's similar to this, right, for PCI. Lynn Wells is part of that. He attended a conference recently that was Pacific Island Nation, and it was, like Micronesia and Indonesia, Marshall Island, all that kind of stuff. And, their point of view about, what's happening relative to weather continuum all the way over to climate is, different and, much more, just like intense, right? Because there's concern, that they're not going to be able to, that some of their, ability to stay where they are, that they're planning for, we have to relocate, and some of that is we have to relocate, from some places to other places, and some of it is we have to relocate our nation, right? And it's like, well, once your land is gone, maybe the nation is gone. It's very interesting, right? What the discussions that are taking place right now, and it's very much, location dependent. So that was one of the things that came back from that. Kyle, you're back. You're an expert in storytelling and narrative. There's like I said, there's a continuum here, all right? Weather people are very trusted right now. As you move over into having discussions about things that are longer term, you stretch credulity for some folks, right? What is the, I don't know, what's the secret sauce, right, to being able to create a more trustworthy continuum of information, from what's happening right now to, what might be happening, longer term? What do you think? AI can help. That's the answer. No.
Well, I mean, AI can help with the positioning and the language for sure, but the The problem is, talk about prevailing winds, I feel like we're swimming upstream with, we live in a society, at least here in America, where science and logic are evil, right? Have been demonized. And so you can position it all you want, but we're in an environment where you can't really talk about it. So I don't like that. I don't know the solution to that, because I feel like one of the challenges with smart, reasonable people is that they think that logic will save the day. And we're not in a logic first environment right now. So I actually don't have a good answer for you on it.
I might say that I don't know how much, particular areas, but I will say that there seems to be a degradation in some part of the population wanting to listen to experts, right? That there is there's a notional idea that, common sense is more valuable than other kinds of, you know, pursuits that lead to, sense making.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one of the competing, the
British.
weather is, okay, it's common sense. I can see it. It's raining right now. All right. But how much you have to, how projectable, how much you're willing to think about. What do I have to do? I'll tell you that there's some practical things that happened here. When I had to replace an air conditioning unit, the person who came to the house said, well, there are a number of things that you need to consider. There's a thing called SEER, right, which is how efficient it is and how much cooling capacity. And he said, you would be well advised, all right, to go for, X number more than the calculation actually suggests for your current square footage, because you're going to need that 6 years from now, right? Because you're going to have an extended and higher, that's what our models are saying. So it's your choice, but you should consider, getting the one that, has more cooling capacity than the calculations suggest. That, I'm not sure that every company would say that, but this one did. All right. And I went with the recommendation, and now I'm more than halfway through that period, and boy, am I glad I did it.
The interesting thing about expertise that I've seen is that so much of it, we want expertise that's going to be like what you said, which is forward-thinking expertise. So much of the expertise in the world is based on what took place in the past century or millennium, as I say, that people are familiar with. So, and the real question now is which expertise applies to the future and which expertise doesn't, because a lot of business expertise, for example, has changed. A lot of other certainly education expertise has changed. And so the idea of that there used to be an expert who just by virtue of having lived in this world for a very long time and seen a lot of things, is that's really changing dramatically, I think.
Yeah. It seems to me that across the population, maybe not, right? But willing to pay some attention to the forecasting that is associated with financial investing, right? That they're willing to Jim Cramer, hit his buttons and talk about, oh, look, this is this is going to be a big thing. These guys are worth investing in, whatever, whoever you choose to listen to. And that is all, projection, right? That it's going to be, good. We had a little bit of that conversation last week about, whether, NVIDIA is a good, and remember, that wasn't an investment conversation, but in any event, I'm not sure that if we took what we're talking about, and instead of talking about climate, we were talking about, predictable markets of, future weather, right? That you kind of, just kind of repackage the whole thing and just said, look, it's like we're going to do a futures contract, but this one is based on, what do we think the weather's going to be like? Which I actually think gets factored into, commodity stuff, right? If you go to, the Commodities Trading Board in Chicago, that they actually look at that stuff and that they have, real facts to support whether we're going to get more wheat or corn or, whatever from any place in the world. But if you could containerize it into, oh, look, this is supporting, something that's financial, which, by the way, the insurance companies and the reinsurance companies are doing for sure, as Mike said, then we might start to put more credence into the narrative, right? Because it's affecting something else that we care about. I just put that out there that, that might be a way to transition from point A to point B.
I have a question about action, and I'd love to know what people
Sure.
think about this stuff, because one of the things that's happening in the world as everybody, more and more people, and certainly more and more young people get smartphones, and therefore something that's happening that may be happening is a certain sense of agency that nobody ever had before. And it would be very interesting for me to start to see in the world simulations, for example, that said, well, suppose we got everybody in the world to do X, Y, or Z, or everybody in your neighborhood, or everybody in a particular locality to do that. And that would literally influence the world in some way. And then, given the fact that we have these phones, we can actually do that. We can actually do those experiments and have the people say, okay, every day, let's see if we can get everybody to do whatever it is on that particular day and see if something happens. Now, obviously, it's long-term and short-term, but I wonder if agency is building up because of this spread of technology.
I don't know, but you know what? It's interesting. There are all kinds of things that are built into our smartphones right now. If you could imagine, right, as an opt-in that you said, I do want to participate in, giving information to, building, the weather model, right?
Mhm.
And so when I'm outdoors and if I turn on, the GPS and says, I know that you're not inside a building, you're now out in some open space. And further, like an accelerometer kind of thing that, oh, there's now it can measure the temperature and wet bulb, that there's a hygrometer with wet bulb, humidity censoring, that's capable, that's feeding into a network. That'd be interesting. It's not, I mean, there's no reason to do it right. I mean, nobody thinks that we need that capability right now, but there are always reasons to bring in another technology and to make the things more sensor aware. Well, these are, this could be a reason to bring those.
Right.
It's
And
got
is that
some
the
kind of
future we're
temperature
going? Sorry, and I was just going to say, is that the future we're going into?
I don't know. Tim, you're one of our experts. So are you, Mike. You've looked at these things. Do you think there's likely to have more of that kind of sensory capability coming into what we carry around or not?
I don't know about carrying around. I mean, as you know, all of the major weather places have sensors all over,
Mhm.
especially the ocean and coasts for monitoring. I just don't know if that will translate to something that is you carry.
I think I think it's a human scale thing, right, Tim? Meaning,
Yeah.
I can have a lot of sensors on my device that I have, which I take up 3 square feet when I'm standing up, something like that. So I can have immediate measurement around me, but I'm not sure, Kevin. I would think there's more likely other things I would do to incent people through the smartphone interface. But as far as the sensor and measurement, I think it's a scale problem, right? You know, if to get any kind of reading on the environment, you'd need a whole lot of people in a certain area to turn that on. Whereas the sensors they have now, they can scale pretty quickly. However, I think, Mark, to your point, I think there are things one can do with one smartphone that we haven't thought about yet that would be perhaps, you know, could incentivize people towards certain behavior.
Yeah.
That would be useful. Like, hey, you know, turn everything off in your house for 5 hours, you know, at night. And if you got to do something, if you're desperate, read that book on your phone or your tablet. But you know, I think there are ways to use some apps to, you know, encourage good behavior or better behavior that benefits the environment. And I don't think we can dismiss that. I think, again, Mark, I don't think we've seen it, but I think there is stuff. But I think if we're talking about it, arming a phone with more sensors, again, you know, it becomes a scale thing. That I
I'm
think
pretty sure that
the
they've got-
infrastructure, you know, that Tim mentioned does a pretty good job already.
Yeah, I think
But
that
there may be
they already
microclimate things.
they already have some kind of temperature sensor, because I know that if it gets too hot, you know, the thing
Yep.
will say, I'm going to shut down now. All right, because you know the whole system, you know, ambient temperature plus, you know, what I'm doing as it says, I need to shut down so I don't, you know, melt the circuits or whatever it is. Right? There's, and I don't know whether there's a similar threshold for it's too cold. I've it's never happened. So, but I have had my phone shut down because it got too hot.
A place where this is actually happening is seismic, that people are using the phones, the collective phones, as early seismic detectors in some ways. I know I've read about that. I keep trying to push to envision the future as opposed to saying tomorrow, but you know, the day after tomorrow, or in 20 years is what I think. And will the real question underneath is, will people, because they have these devices and these connections and these sensors and these capabilities, will we have, as people, more agency?
Well, don't know.
I'm not asking for an answer. This is a
I know,
rhetorical
yeah, I
question.
know, I understand, but you know, since you just finished writing, you know, Third Millennium Kids,
Yeah.
do you think that they are going to come prepared with a different, when I say sensory apparatus, I don't really mean that they have more, you know, ability to sense, but do you think that there will be more sensitive to, you know, the issues that we're discussing, and therefore have higher level of awareness?
I do. I do. And I think it's because they will see people, for example, I'm starting to hear, you mentioned it before, the people on the islands, right, who are definitely threatened by this stuff. They are starting to, we're just at the very beginning of banding together as groups and saying, what can we do, and how can we figure it out, and how can we do this? I've been talking with people about getting the young people, for example, on all the islands to be in some kind of a cohort or a coalition where they would do that kind of thing. I think that's going to be a big piece of how the world's going to be different when the generation that grew up with all this stuff comes to the fore, as opposed to the generation that's now in power, that sees the world, as we discussed a few minutes ago, very differently.
I see this already. This is not the difference in the late millennial and Gen Z generation is they start with that sensitivity and sensibility, not have to learn it. Our generations had to learn it or be persuaded to it. My students, almost all of their first projects begin with a sensibility of environment, health, community health, public health, and other factors, especially sustainability issues. So I think it's quite ready, and it's going to be a marketing issue to put on those features on phones. The sensor costs are dollars, a few dollars, not not large amounts at all. It will be a sales and activity that's going to be a part of the rollout. As I mentioned in the in the chat. It's we focus on the cell phone, but the watch, the rings are growing quite prolific. I have one of my students is an exec at Nike. They're putting sensors in the shoes to monitor not just your gait, how you stand, all those things are health indicators that can be a part of it. And certainly the Ray-Bans and other glasses are, it would be a nominal addition to put indications other than accelerometers to look at motion.
Yeah, and there's a resurgence here in North Carolina. If you don't remember the history of North Carolina, there was tobacco was a big industry, agriculture, trucking, we were a big distribution, for a long time. Now we have more banking, but we used to have a lot of textile, right, around here, and it all went offshore. There's a resurgence happening right now with more technical stuff that's being driven by the DoD around smart fabrics, clothing that has, sensors built into it that changes the temperature of the person that's wearing it, that kind of stuff. That is actually coming back, and we're, it's just interesting to see that happening, Ben. I have a different question. I'm going to kind of change the tack here because I think we've had a good discussion. Ben, back to you for a second. You just had something yesterday, if I recall, where you had a cohort of young people from Africa in. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALE.
Okay.
The group,
Can you
25.
just kind of unpack, what you were doing with them and what happened? I'm interested in what happened because this is much about perspectives, discussion as anything else. So go ahead, please.
Yeah, these are 25 individuals and these aren't kids. These were in the 25 to 30 year age group. These are entrepreneurs who have some established entity from 20 different countries. And the the interest in work, of course, as they go around IBM, Google headquarters here in Atlanta, and UPS and Microsoft, all they hear every other word being AI, and so they were curious about that and wanted, but everybody was talking about it, not working GAI. So I I actually turned out because one of the people from Microsoft had COVID. I had him for the whole day. I spent the entire morning with a workshop on GAI experiences, and then brought it into an enterprise level. So in a spirit of toys becoming tools, I had them exercise. I gave them a GAI scavenger hunt to work different tasks, so they understand a sense of capabilities and amazing creative work. I had them write songs, poems, and create movies in a matter of 5 minutes and things like that. And they were astounded by what they could generate about their own countries and other factors like that. But we spent the afternoon looking at high principles elements as we're talking about first principles and the types of things that we've been addressing here as well. But they're already ready. I mean, ready to talk about the climate, the environment. They're socially conscious from the beginning. They're looking at spiriting leadership within their own countries on different missions. They're very much into integrating down the chains. One of my students has a a company called Naya by Africa. And she sells health and beauty aids, and and she works back with the women farmers. So she works completely back down the chain for shea oil with the farmers. So it's farm to her production and then production going forward. That are very interesting and different dynamics for how you grow and what the network of growth and success means. It was very heartening, very different from my attitude on what's going on politically in the U.S.
Well,
Well,
thanks for
good
sharing
for you.
that.
Good for you, Ben. Africa is such a dark continent. I mean, in the sense that that there's not a lot going on there where we're really elevating people's abilities to access the internet, to use the technologies that are available to them. So congratulations on taking that opportunity and really moving people a little bit deeper into what's available to them, because I think it's
By the year
generally
2020,
unavailable.
by the year 2050, Nigeria will be the third largest populated country in the world. And they're not ready for it, and as one might expect. So there are great opportunities, but huge problems as well.
Yeah.
Well,
I
yeah,
might
but
point out, go ahead, Bruce, finish your thought.
it's just that Nigeria is so internally corrupt that trying to get anything done is so it's so difficult that it impedes the proliferation of the technologies that are available to people.
That there's truth to that. Another truth, though, is that our financial and banking system has imported stuff from Africa that got started because there was no bricks and mortar, right? And therefore, m-commerce and the development of M-Pesa and those kinds of things were kind of like, that's cool. Let's bring that, into, first world use, right? And so you see a lot of, new companies, things that are, one-offs from what you would consider traditional banking, right? That are available, but it's here on your phone, right? And I think that, the forcing function, right, of need, right? What was the old saying, that, necessity is the mother of invention, is that there are necessities that are happening in Africa that if we pay attention to, we can benefit from, just like universal design. There are lots of mistakes that can be made by trying to take a first world solution and dropping it into another culture, right?
And
Another economy.
we spent time on the notion of they've had 200 years of colonization, decolonizing now, and how to approach the future without recolonizing, because that's happening on the digital front as well. There are lessons in India. Adhar and Akash are lessons, good and bad, about that approach and reach moving out. As you mentioned, M-Pesa was built by necessity because they were flip phone culture and not smartphone, and so they built a commerce infrastructure that was wholly independent of the rest of the world's push towards their rapid digitalization at the time, and it was sufficient for what they had as well. Interesting stories and interesting lessons for us as well.
One of the interesting lessons is that we have been proud, and we were proud since the Industrial Revolution, of our infrastructure. And we put in this huge infrastructure that enabled us to do a lot of things. And that in the new technology that we're moving into, that infrastructure is now an impediment often. And it's something that we hold to, and it has a lot of economic benefits for certain people. And so that holds us back from moving as quickly as we want into the future. And look at coal, and look at electricity, and look at all these kind of things that we need to keep. If we want to move forward faster, we need to keep a very open mind that what we had may not be the right thing we need for the future.
Yeah, and it's not a new lesson to us. Japan leapfrogged us in wireless technology, in part because we were crippled by a legacy infrastructure that prevented and our evolution in many ways as well. The father of e-commerce in Japan is one of my students from Harvard, Mark, and he was at NTT, and they leapfrogged us in part because they didn't have the burden of the legacy system, and so it's been a challenge that in Africa that they've leveraged, but it's also an advantage and opportunity for them to redo and rethink it.
All right.
Electrical generation is a huge, another big example of that that's going on right now.
And not an industrial age response where we're going to build giant plants and giant pipes for doing it. They're doing it in pockets in regional and solar and suburban activities. A very different approach to growth.
Yeah, if you do it the way that, Germany's approaching it, which is that, you're creating electricity at the village level, and then you interconnect the villages so that when one village goes down, that there's resilience, right? That you can borrow a cup of electricity from, the two adjacent, that they create a grid-like structure. Pretty interesting. They still have really big plans to support, where there's heavy industry, but they've divided into two different companies. One is the village grid, and the other is the the big standard utilities. The worst of both possible worlds is what happens in large cities like Mumbai, where the grid is not reliable, so everybody's got a generator, and periodically the whole city turns on all of their gas powered generators, and now you can cut the air with a knife. Let's hope that we can get to the solutions that are lifting, all right, human life expectancy as opposed to cutting it down. All right, so we're at the top of the hour. Any closing thoughts, comments? Mike,
I guess
you want to bring us home with?
Oh no, I will, and then we'll do a quick one to Bruce. No, I think this is a great call. I think this is one of those areas I'd like to continue periodically surfacing stuff. I mentioned to you, Kevin, my niece who works at the software company, that seems to be a new area, and I'm waiting for an answer to her. This is for a follow-up on this general topic. My niece is a communications exec at a company called Watershed that provides kind of the platforms to run your business. Make sure you're hitting your carbon footprint goals, you're using as much clean green power as possible, etc. They're talking about the use of data to manage that. And I think I'm waiting for her to respond, or one of her coworkers, how much of those data sets they use in the company are actually sitting, how much of the data that's been collected for decades by companies can be used to help document a company's efforts and augment that data selection. I'm waiting to hear, because like we all know, marketing and sales platforms have an immense amount of data that's not always obviously just about sales, that I think could be of interest or used by some of these environmental.
I just had an interesting thought about this kind of thing that we don't do. For example, air quality that you just brought up before, Kevin. What if your phone, for example, it changed color, or the screen perhaps changed color depending on the air quality. So if your phone was red, you don't want to go outside. If your phone is green, feel free, and in between and stuff like that. Those are the kind of things that we could do that we're not yet doing on a large scale that might influence stuff.
I'd say the Climb app does that, Mark. If you have ever seen it, CLIME, you can have it pop a notification if the sensor is in your area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I'll end the call with this. All right, the original uniform, right, that I wore as an early career IBMer, right, was a white shirt, three-piece suit, dark shoes, right, usually black, all right,
and a hat.
Yeah, well, no hat, not me at least. And I would have to take trips into Manhattan, right? The indicator that I had been to Manhattan was my white shirt turned a different color by the time I got home, right? I mean, around, especially noticeable around the neck collar and the sleeves, right? They were gray, okay, by the time I got back from Manhattan, right, from visit to 590 Madison Avenue. The air quality has improved significantly since then, but early career it was pretty bad. So I was wearing my indicator, all right, and having to bleach it out. Thank you for everything that you do. Thanks for being part of the call today. We'll talk again soon. Cheers.
See ya.
Thanks, Kevin.